welcome. So today we have Linn Huntington presenting about a history of printing and publishing. So this goes along with our new exhibit that we have here in the South City area, but also in the exhibit cases up near the front of the library. All of these exhibits recognize the days of Fort Hays State University's publishing of the Leader and also of the yearbook, The Reveille, and the university printing press that was here, creating a variety of different university publications. So Dr. Huntington will also walk us around the exhibit a little bit as well to point out different methods of printing and point out some different things that we have going on there. So I'll introduce. Oh, and I didn't introduce myself.
Yes, please introduce yourself.
I'm Cindy Landis, and I'm the outreach specialist here at Forsyth Library.
To introduce myself, I'm David Overmare. I am the University Archivist. So all of the images and items that are part of the exhibit that's going on right now are part of the collections from the University Archives. And we have many copies of the University Leader going back to the 19-teens, and we have many copies of the Reveilles going back to 1914. So if you are interested in these publications and you want to learn more about them, come in and see them for yourself and read through them, then you would contact me, and I would be more than happy to help you with that.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today. I donated some items from my teaching days to the library, and they said, wow, would you be interested in doing a presentation? And so I'm delighted to be back on campus. First of all, I'm not a doctor. When I retired, I have my master's, but I never got a doctorate degree. When I retired, suddenly I became a doctor. Everything I get now is addressed to Dr. Huntington. Had I known it was that simple to get a doctorate, I would have retired long ago, but no. So I arrived at Fort Hays State in 1990 as the Director of Journalism in the Department of Communication, which later became the Department of Communication Studies. I have both my bachelor's and master's in journalism and mass communication, and I have an emphasis in scholastic journalism in my bachelor's and in publications management for my master's. And so they were looking for someone to advise the campus newspaper and direct the journalism program, and so that's what I was privileged to do. The first 13 years I was here, I advised the University Leader newspaper, and for 2 of those years I also advised the Reveille. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Leader and Reveille here in a few minutes, but primarily I'm going to be sharing with you the history of printing and publishing, which is really the history of mass communication. If you remember, maybe from a history course you took long ago, early forms of printing were on clay tablets or scrolls. You're probably familiar with the term the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in caves and are among the earliest forms of human communication that we have in written form. They are early versions of the Bible. And the problem with clay tablets was they broke fairly easily. And the problem with scrolls were you had to unroll a scroll to get to the material you wanted. So it wasn't very user-friendly. The Romans developed kind of the forerunner of the modern-day book called a Codex, with a C, Codex. And a Codex was stacks of papyrus or some type of animal skin on which they would write things, and then they would punch holes in one side and use pieces of cowhide to tie those pieces together, and then they would put a hardboard on top and bottom, kind of like a modern day scrapbook, if I have any scrapbookers in the audience. All of that leads up to the Middle Ages. In the mid-1430s, we don't know the exact year. Some people put it at 1436, some people put it at 1439, but a German man by the name of Johannes Gutenberg invented the modern day printing press. He was the first European to do so. We know that the Chinese had a similar type of printing press, but they did not pursue it. We don't know if that's because of the complexity of their characters and their writing, or if they just didn't see a need for commercial printing. But Gutenberg developed that, as I say, in the mid-1430s. Now, prior to that, there had been printing, but one of primarily two different methods. Either hand copying something over and over again, which was very laborious. There were religious orders, there were monks that would spend their entire lives hand copying certain books of the Bible. And so those hand copied books were very expensive, very rare, and very precious to own. So book ownership during that time was rare, it was expensive, it was really reserved for the upper classes. The other method of printing was what we call woodblock printing. Now, I've just brought two very small examples, which I will pass around. Woodblock printing was where they would carve an entire page mold out of wood. So if you had something you wanted printed commercially, you had to hire someone to carve the mold of the entire page. And then that mold was affixed to usually a piece of wood. Now, both of these that I brought are metal on wood, but wood on wood was also used. And there are some larger examples of woodblock printing in the display cases up front, but I'll just pass these around so you can take a look at what woodblock printing is. Usually we had some kind of picture or drawing that was carved and affixed to a block of wood, and thus the name woodblock printing. Well, you can imagine how expensive and how difficult it would be to print something if you had to carve an entire mold for an entire page. And if you had a misspelled word, for example, you couldn't just fix the word. You would have to recarve or have someone recarve that entire page. So this was, again, very laborious, very time-consuming, very difficult to do. And that's why Gutenberg's press and his method of printing were so phenomenal and so, earth-shattering in terms of breaking new ground. Please feel free to come in and over here, sit down, whatever. We have food, so. The thing that was so revolutionary about Gutenberg and his printing method was movable type. Individual pieces of type that he had molds for, and then he would just set individual letters. And again, I'm going to pass around some different fonts of type so you can see. Some are very ornate. Those are the ones I'll start on this side. That's because the hand copying of books at that time, these monks used very ornate, kind of like modern day calligraphy. Lots of flourishes and lots of loops. And so early day type resembled that. It soon gave way to plainer type, type that didn't have all those flourishes and flowers and so on, because people found the ornate type so You pass those that way. Because people found those so difficult to read. Now, please note, this is made of lead. So you're not going to get enough on your hands to make it unhealthy, but make sure you wash your hands after you, I'm like your mom here, okay? I'm telling you, wash your hands after you play with my type. So, okay, so this movable type totally revolutionized printing, because now you could, if you had a misspelled word, you could just change that word. So Gutenberg would put the type in a large type tray, and I'm going to show you some pictures of a type tray here in a minute. And then, as he got an order for something to be printed, he would take the type out of the type tray, and then he would put it in what's called a chase, which is a tray, and then he would tighten that down, then place ink on the type, okay, roll the ink on the type. Gutenberg also was the first one to develop oil-based ink, so we have him to thank for all the stuff that rubs off on our hands when we read newspapers. Okay, so he developed oil-based paint, or oil-based ink, excuse me, and then he would roll it on the type, put a layer of paper on, and then he used an old converted wine press that he would hand lower onto that paper. Then he would raise it back up, very gently peel the paper off of the press. And this is where we get the term letterpress printing, because the letters are actually pressing against the paper. So, this new technology, this new invention of Gutenberg's, totally transformed printing, but also had enormous impacts on society in general. With the arrival of movable type, now knowledge could be transmitted across national boundaries, and this included scientific discoveries, and there was a lot of new discovery going on in the 1400s and 1500s. Navigational charts, people exploring the new world, all kinds of information that now is much easier to transmit across national boundaries. It made it possible for political leaders to distribute information and maintain order. It encouraged literacy, which in turn led to compulsory education, which in turn led to the rise of a middle or merchant class. You have to remember that this is a time when people were first getting the Bible in English, in a language they could actually read, rather than Latin, which very few people could read except those who'd been educated in universities. This wide distribution of knowledge, made possible by movable type, also helped facilitate social movements such as the Protestant Reformation and the Industrial Reformation. So the printing press was truly the beginning of mass communication and had enormous impact on Europe and, of course, the rest of the world. Now, the next major development in printing came 450 years later. So think about that. For 450 years, Gutenberg's press, which was hand-operated, the type was hand-set, suited everybody's needs. There were advancements to presses in general. The Rotary Press was developed in 1790, which instead of being on a flat surface, which we call a flatbed, it became round. So the Rotary Press was developed in 1790. And plates were curved then around a cylinder, so that you had the paper here and the plate here, and they would be meeting in the middle. But as I said, The next advancement in printing itself came in 1884. A man by the name of Ottmar Mergenthaler produced the Linotype machine. Now, I want to show you how Linotype came into being. Gutenberg was a watchmaker. He was a German immigrant, lived in Baltimore, was always kind of tinkering down in his basement. I'm sure his wife would go, Ottmar, come up, it's time for supper. But oh no, he was determined he was going to invent a machine that would set type by machine so that we no longer had to set type by hand. So that line of type machine, came to be Linotype, just leaving out the E and the F there. So we have the Linotype machine. For the first time, type is now being set by machine rather than being set by hand. This too speeds up the printing process tremendously. Now we are going to journey over to the display cases, and I'm going to show you people working here at Fort Hays on Linotype machines. Not in the 1880s, however, because Fort Hays wasn't here then, but much, much later. So the Linotype machine was the primary method for printing until the 1980s. So for the next 100 years, Linotype was the method of printing. So join me. We're going to, this is show and tell time.
You're okay with us eating while you're talking?
Of course. You bet.
Old married man.
Come on. I want you to be able to see. Both of these photos show operators in the Fort Hays print shop, these two sitting at a machine. Now this looks like a typewriter, but the keys on a Linotype machine were not arranged at all the way a typewriter was. Nobody knows why Mergenthaler had a machine that was set up totally differently than a regular typewriter. It meant that someone who was trained on a Linotype machine had to learn a whole new key system. And we don't know exactly why he did that, but he did. But at any rate, as the speed now of printing is as fast as someone can type, the machine itself, you see it has all these little conveyor belts. The machine itself would select a mold and send it down a little conveyor belt, and it would actually impact or hit on hot lead. And this is where we get the term hot type. When computers arrived, we suddenly went to cold type, not because it was in a freezer, no, but because it was different than hot type. So the Linotype machine, the operators would set the width of the column that they wanted the type set, and the machine would automatically break the type up into sentences. And I'm going to pass around an example of a line of type here in a second. Now there's also a picture of someone working on a Ludlow machine. And I was going to show you that also. Ludlow machines were machines that were for larger type, like for headline size type. Ludlow machines never went to lines of type. With Ludlow machines, type for headlines was still set one letter at a time. Once it got up to a certain point size, they might be able to set like 18 point or 24 point on a Linotype machine. I don't know exactly where that break off was, but for larger type, for larger headline type like 60 point or 72 point, it was still set using Ludlow Machines. There is a picture somewhere of someone using a Ludlow machine. I'm just not seeing it. Okay, any questions so far on letterpress or Linotype?
You said Linotype was used until 1980s?
Until the 1980s, yes. In the 1980s, and that just transitions very nicely into my next major point. The 1980s, we see the development of computer typesetting. And here, you no longer had to be trained on a big bulky Linotype machine. Type was set on computers, and you all are familiar with that. It was then trimmed and pasted up, and we're going to look at a paste up here behind us.
Before you're doing that, I always have recalled a word that has no meaning, and that's the word Etta Owen Shootloop. And that's the first line on the Linotype typewriter. Etta Owen Shootloop.
Well, thank you for adding that. I did not know that. I did not know that.
What did it say?
Okay.
And that you know, she said that they weren't in, it's not the keyboard like we use today. It had its own, but the first, if you go across the first line on the old Linotypes, it's spelled Etta Owen, E-T, Etta, A, Owen, O-W-E-N, Shootloop, S-H-U, Shootloop, L-U, or whatever. I can't do it now, but I remember that was one of the words I always remembered, the Etta Owen Shootloop.
So now you have a piece of trivia for your next trivia night, okay? Once type was set on a computer, it was then trimmed. It was run through a waxer, which would wax one side of the type. You never wanted both sides waxed, although I had students that sometimes did both. When I arrived at the Leader, they were still using paste up and the old wax machines. And after it was waxed, it was pasted up. Okay, here's an example of a paste up from the Leader, July 22nd, 1992. You can actually see paste ups there of the Leader. And here's one, a partial paste up also. This is a full page. In the summer, we just had tabloid size newspapers, but for the regular school year, for fall and spring, we had a full page, what we call a broadsheet. Here's a picture of students from the Leader with the advisor who preceded me, Ron Johnson. Notice how young he looks. Ron and I are about the same age. So, Ron, the last I heard, it was at the University of Indiana. I don't know if he's retired yet or not. But anyway, he and students are actually pasting up the Leader. Now, you may be wondering about the blue ink there. If something was wrong and you needed to make a fix, you could mark out what needed to be fixed with that blue, because that did not show up. That blue ink did not show up when that page was shot and the negative was made. And let's go back and I'll show you a negative. I know for some of you, if you worked on the Leader and or Reveille back in those days, this is a trip down memory lane, and that's good.
Sorry.
Okay.
Or if you worked on any
Or if you worked on any high school or college publication, this is probably a trip down memory lane. After the paste up was finished, okay, it would be taken to a camera room. And the camera room would basically create a negative. It would take a picture with a camera and produce a negative of that page. And so, from the negative, then, they would lay it on the negative on a piece of pre-treated, usually aluminum, and there is an example of a plate right here. Okay, in fact, both of this negative and this plate are from this publication, which was a recruiting brochure that was put out by the journalism department to recruit new students during the 1980s. And when I arrived in 1990, I had stacks of these in my office. Of course, with pictures of the former advisor and his students. And at any rate, that recruitment brochure, this plate and this negative are from that actual publication. But at any rate, then we would have a plate made. And notice that some of the pages are upside down. That's because when you're printing a brochure, it's going to be folded in a certain way. And so those pages have to appear on the plate and on the negative the way they're going to appear if you spread out that entire brochure. So keep in mind when we look through the brochure, it's going to, all the pages are going to be right side up, we hope, if it was on the plate in the correct fashion. Then the plate, this is an aluminum plate, and the aluminum plate is then wrapped around that rotary press. Okay, it's wrapped around the press, and then it's printed. Now, one of the other advances in technology is what we call offset printing. Remember I mentioned that letterpress printing, which Gutenberg used, was actually the type and the paper actually met. With offset printing, the plate and the paper never touch. And I'm going to, now I realize this looks a little complicated, but it really isn't, and I'll pass this around. But we actually have 3 rollers here. The top roller is the one the plate goes on. The bottom roller is the one, the impression cylinder, and then the paper comes through here. But this is a middle roller. Okay, imagine that these are rollers about yay big, and the plate is inked and is putting an impression on that middle roller, which is a rubber blanket. So the image is transferred from the plate, from that aluminum plate, onto that rubber blanket, and then from the rubber blanket, the image is passed to the paper. So that the paper never touches the plate. It touches that rubber, kind of a piece of foam rubber that's wrapped around that middle roller.
That's the ink.
And the ink, okay, ink is constantly being shot this way onto that plate. And water is also being shot. They're actually, imagine like a little hose of water that's squirting onto this. The water washes away the ink from any part of the plate that has not been exposed. So that ink will adhere to those parts of the plate that have print or a picture on them, and then the water washes that ink off of the rest of the plate. I wish I had a video to show you exactly how that's done, but I'm sorry that I don't. But I'll pass this around. Basically, this is offset printing, and this is the method that is used today in most places. Now, we still have flatbed presses, and they're still used. For many years, the print shop had a flatbed press, the print shop here on campus. I don't know if they still do or not, but number of pages that we can print overall. Because 3 of those normal rollers that are being used for black ink are now being used for blue, red, and yellow ink. So the color process means that those colors are layered one on top of the other as the paper goes through the press. So the blue is layered on the yellow is layered on the red is layered on the black. Up in the front display cases, they have some color printing where the layering is a little off, and you may see this sometimes in the funny papers where they haven't quite gotten the impression one right on top of the other. You have this little blue outline or this little red outline of something. That means that it's not in register. That's the printing term there, register. The press people need to stop the press and do a little adjusting. But stopping the press means that, number one, the paper might break and you might have to rethread the paper through the press again. That's not a good day. But also, it means that anytime you stop the press, you're losing time. You're losing time. And most print shops have a tight schedule that they have to meet. When the Hayes Daily was still printed in Hayes, it no longer is, but when it was still printed in Hayes, it also printed the Leader, the University Leader. And we had certain times we had to have the paper to the press because our time was a certain 4-hour period. And if the students were late, which they weren't, but if they had been late in getting it to the press, we would have lost our time. And it wouldn't have been printed until the next time that we had reserved. When I was the advisor to the Leader for those 13 years, we published twice a week on Tuesday mornings and Friday mornings. In the summer, we published once a week. But they had, the Hayes Daily News had weeklies that they were also printing, and so each of those publications had to have their material to the press by a certain time or it wasn't going to be printed. Literally, it wasn't going to be printed. Keep in mind that part of what I was doing was teaching students how to run a small business. And that means deadlines. And that means meeting payroll. And that means you got to have enough money coming in from advertising to make your payroll. So yes, I was teaching students about newspapers and writing and editing and so on, and selling ads and doing photography, but I was also teaching them how to run a business. And I think for most of those students, whether you worked on a yearbook or a newspaper in high school or college, that business experience is invaluable. That real life experience of working with real life clients, interviewing real life people, it's more than just a homework assignment. It is going to be published out there for everyone to see. So let me pass this around so you can kind of look at a diagram of offset printing. Now, the arrival of the internet in the 1990s is the last phase of publishing that I'm going to be talking about. The internet, again, is revolutionary in the sense that it provides instant communication anywhere in the world, and for the first time, it's the first type of publishing method that allows for instant feedback. Newspapers, yeah, an editor might get a letter to the editor, but it's going to be several days removed probably from when the initial article ran. Radio tries to provide instant feedback through talk shows and call-in, but have you ever tried to call in and you're on hold for ever and ever and ever? So the internet provides instant communication feedback. And that has good points, and that can have some negative aspects also. The internet also was revolutionary technology in that it allows anyone with any type of computer and an internet connection to become a mass communicator. No one needs to have a printing press in their basement any longer. It opens up the world of publishing to anybody. Now, that opening up the world of publishing to anybody has also had some negative effects. Yes, people can now express themselves more easily and can communicate to the masses more easily than we've ever been able to do in human history. That has also resulted in a glut of incomplete and slanted information and outright lies that can be spread very rapidly and very easily. So while it provides the means for instant communication and instant feedback, it also means it's much easier to transmit misinformation more easily also. Traditional media organizations have had lengthy and usually rigorous processes in place to verify information before it was disseminated. Now, anyone can create a website and publish anything without anyone verifying the accuracy of that information before it's disseminated. In fact, and I'm not trying to pick on HayesPost.com, I'm really not, but HayesPost.com is a source of information in Ellis County. Anyone can post anything on HayesPost.com that they want to. And it's not verified by anyone other than the poster before it is posted and disseminated. Now, if the editors of HayesPost.com get a complaint about the information that's out there, they can certainly go in, and I'm sure they do, check it out. But notice that's after the fact. That's after it's posted. As just one recent example, and again, I'm not trying to pick on HayesPost.com, because when you have this type of operation, this is going to happen, this incident that I'm about to share with you. You remember our recent school bond election, okay? Well, HayesPost.com had the results wrong for several hours. They had the school bond passing rather than being defeated, until someone told them that whoever had posted that information had gotten it backwards.
The old Dewey is elected.
What?
The old Dewey is elected.
Yes, yes.
Then why do they do it? Why do we have these Hayes posts, whatever?
Number one, they make money. And number two, they're competing against an organization that does not choose to put material out there until it is verified and is credible, which is the Hayes Daily News. That means the Hayes Daily News posts their information later, and it's not as immediate. HayesPost.com has the information faster.
Is it good?
Depends on whether you want fast or reliable.
Reliable?
Well, we all have our own individual preferences, I'm sure.
Reliable.
Another thing we have to remember is that information is a product. Okay, information is a product. Many people are accustomed to getting things for free. The HayesPost.com is free. No one has to pay to go on HayesPost.com. The Hayes Daily News is not free. You have to be a subscriber to get on their website and get their information. So again, you get what you pay for. Okay? But the internet has meant that the burden for determining truth and falsehood is squarely on the shoulders of the consumer. And vetting information and verifying information is a process that many consumers find confusing and difficult and very time consuming. So you either let an editor verify information for you and you pay them for the product you're getting, or you get a product for free, you opt to do that, and you have to vet the information and verify it yourself. So those are choices we all have to make. Okay. Any questions or other comments on that? I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the Leader and the Reveille specifically. How many here worked on either the Leader or Reveille when you were in school? Oh, good. Oh, wow. Good. Okay. So the Leader began publishing, I think, the same year Fort Hayes started. I think the Leader began publishing in 1902, but I could be wrong. What? You were. You can verify 1902.
We got a copy of that? The issue in the library?
They go back to the 19s.
Yes.
Okay?
So I think
I was a senior.
1900 something is probably when it started.
Okay.
But
The Leader was in print form only until 1999. In January of 1999, my students produced the first digital issue of the Leader. Now, we still produce the print issue, okay, but we also produced digital issues. And both were produced until the Leader ceased publication in January of 2013. And I had hoped today to bring you the first digital special edition that the Leader ever produced. I was going to show it to you, but the university has lost it. The university has not preserved any of the digital issues from January of 1999 until the fall of 2012. That was the last semester that the Leader published. So all of those digital issues from 99 to 2012 are gone. And you may say, well, but we have the print issues, which we do, and I'm glad we do. But what some people may not be aware of is because of contest rules during that time, the digital issue always had to have original material that was not in the print issue. Those were guidelines imposed by national organizations and state organizations if the Leader wanted to participate in contests, which of course we did. So, so the digital issue always contained original information. It also contained everything that was in the print issue, but it also would have additional material, like maybe a podcast, or extra photos that didn't run in the print issue, or maybe longer versions of stories that ran in the print issue, and then they would be in full length in the digital issue. Also, if we had special investigative series, because of the amount of room those series would take up, they would run only the digital issue of the Leader. So all of that is gone. It's just,
Is that really serious that we can never find those archive issues? I mean, it's not that long ago.
Wayback Machine or something?
I mean, couldn't it be?
I'm working on this, but yeah, as far as I know.
I mean, couldn't you even appeal to people that were around at that time to see if they have anything? I mean, it seems, I agree, it seems like that's where we're missing a historical value there.
No, I absolutely agree. But yeah, as far as I know and as far as I've been able to find out from everyone I've contacted, they're just gone. So this is a good example of why preserving our history matters.
right, right. I'm one of those people that has a keen interest in history. When I went through school with a journalism degree, we had to have a minor, and we could either pick English or we could pick social sciences. And I picked social sciences, particularly history, economics, political science, and geography. Those were my four. We had to have 24 hours, so we had to have 4 hours, 6 hours in 4 different areas. So history to me, journalists to me are the first recorders of history. So when my students came to me on September 11th of 2001, and they were in the process of distributing that day's issue on campus already, but you all know what happened that day. And so they asked if they could put out a special edition the next day. Well, I've already described to you the problems in putting out a special edition print issue. That wasn't going to happen. But I told them we could certainly put out a special edition digital issue. And so they got to work and they did that. And that's what I was going to show you. I was going to show you that first digital special edition, and then I was going to show you this, which is the following print issue that came out on Friday, September 14th of 2001. 2 of the articles that ran in the digital issue are in the print issue. This one about Dr. Larry Gould, who was then provost, who was in Washington, D.C. for a meeting and who was stranded there, whose luggage was lost. He never did get his luggage. He was there for a conference, and his computer, his laptop was in his luggage and never found.
I think he did get that.
Well, okay, but if so, it was not within the time frame that this was published. Then this story, United We Stand, was updated from the Wednesday special edition that ran digitally. So I have this for you all to take a look at if you would like. And then I asked Anna to provide for us some actual reveilles that you can look at. The reveille published from, let me get my dates here. The reveille published from 1914 to 2003. And all of those reveilles are in the archives, which Anna is happy to share with people if you want to see those. Anyway, we have, this is the 90th edition, the 90th anniversary book, which won all kinds of national awards, which was produced in 1993 and was published, or excuse me, was printed off campus. This is the 2003 100th anniversary, 100th year anniversary of the reveille. Student government mandated that it be published in paperback and through the print shop on campus. So you can see the wonderful quality that they did. Although, I'm not sure that it has any color in it. No, it doesn't. So, so at any rate.
What awards did this one receive?
I know it won an All-American Award.
Did it?
Yeah. And in the wonderful world of high school and college journalism, that's the highest award you can get. So at any rate, please come take a look at these. I'll be around to answer questions. We still have about 5 or 6 minutes. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I'm so engaged with your presentation because it does take me back to being a high school newspaper editor and a high school yearbook editor-in-chief, as well as college yearbook editor-in-chief and college newspaper. So this has really been great, Linn. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm glad that it has been a wonderful trip down memory lane. And you can see for so many years, printing remained relatively unchanged. The process of typesetting and printing was adequate. It served people's needs. With the arrival of computers and the arrival of the internet, though, everything has changed. But think about your own habits in terms of how you get news and information today, and I think you can see that it has probably changed considerably.
So my question is are there any premium presses anywhere in the world that are still using letterpress because they want to, that's their market? And do you believe that there is a market for whatever the you can feel the difference between
Right.
letterpress, linotype, as well as digital? And
Right.
Is there anybody in the world that's still doing that?
Not that I'm aware of. There may be some small specialty presses that are still doing what we call rotogravure, which is a very expensive and old printing process. There may be some publications out there that are still being printed using rotogravure, but none for mass consumption that I'm aware of. Is anyone else?
No, the only presses that I know that still use that are, like you said, small specialty presses that do mostly like wedding invitations and those kinds of items that are going to have such a very small run. But also sometimes art books or art portfolios that an artist will put out will also be printed in that way because that's what they chose to do. But again, those are like items that are going to have what in the grand scheme of printing is a tiny, tiny run. So.
Yeah. Everything today is pretty much for mass consumption. So.
Are there still universities that have yearbook?
Oh, yes. After the Reveille was discontinued in 2003, the students produced a magazine for 2 or 3 years called The Tiger's Tail. And it was produced once a semester, but it did not last more than, as I say, a couple of 3 years. More smaller colleges produce magazines than are producing yearbooks. And that's certainly true of community colleges. But I think K-State still has their yearbook. So larger universities are more inclined, I think, to still publish a yearbook. But yearbooks have gone out of fashion on the college level, primarily because of their expense. And it's not that you can't produce it, it's that students don't want to pay the cost of, the actual cost of producing the book. The Reveille, for many years, and I'll just mention this, was distributed free to anyone who wanted one. Yeah. When I arrived, it was free. It was part of a student's activity fees, and so any student who wanted one.
We paid for it in our fees.
Right, it was paid for in student activity fees.
So when they discontinued the Reveille, did they reduce the student activities fee?
No,
Of course
No.
not.
Yeah.
no. In fact, when student government demanded the staff start charging, they did not reduce the student activity fee. So students, it was still in the student activity fee, but the staff did not get those funds anymore. And part of the problem was the Reveille was covered what we call a complete school year. Many high school and college books don't. They come out in May, so they go to press in, let's say, the middle of March. And so they don't cover March, April, or May. The Reveille did. So the book came out in the fall. And student government would not allow us to include in the fee that we charge students, would not allow us to include a mailing fee. Because it's never been done before. Well, no, but we've never charged for the book before. So, so we would have stacks and, cases and cases of books that had been paid for that nobody came and got because students had already graduated, and even if we sent them an email, which we would, or a letter, if someone's graduated and they are working in wherever, they're not going to come back to Fort Hays State to get their book. They could send us the mailing fee, and some did, but many did not. So I think today, if people want copies of old yearbooks, they have to go through the alumni office. I think I'm correct about that.
They'll have old yearbooks, yeah.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. Please eat more pizza. Take a look at the student produced publications at Fort Hays State University.